We're about a month away from Election Day, and tonight, potentially the last debate in this historic election. We've got a lot prepared for you right here on The Nation Decides.
Good evening and welcome to NTD's The Nation Decides 2024. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And joining us here at the desk for our pre- and post-debate analysis is political strategist Dante Mills. He's also an attorney and founding partner of Mills & Edwards LLP. Amber Duke, Washington editor at The Spectator, U.S. edition, and Steamboat Institute Tony Blankley Fellow. Democratic strategist Theron Bond, who has her boots on the ground and pulse in her community, managing several local political campaigns. And Gerard Filitti, a political strategist, senior counsel at the Lawfare Project and geopolitical analyst. Welcome, everyone. And in less than an hour, we'll see the vice presidential candidates, Democratic candidate Tim Walz and Republican candidate J.D. Vance, debate right here in New York City. You can watch the CBS News vice presidential debate on CBS or simulcast it right here on NTD News at 9 p.m. Eastern.
And let's go now to the Hub with NTD's Dave Martin, who's got the rules for tonight's debate. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Tiff. Now, as we wait for tonight's debate to get started, let's go ahead and take a look at those debate rules as agreed upon by J.D. Vance and Tim Walz here. First rule here, no live audience, and that's the same as it was for the two presidential debates earlier this year. Next rule here, mics not muted. Now that's different than how the two presidential debates were before, where one candidate was muted while the other was talking. CBS though says they can mute at their own discretion. Number three here, no pre-written notes. All they're going up there with is a pen, a pad of paper, and a bottle of water. Number four here, no communication with our campaign staff, and that's for the entire duration of this 90-minute debate, including during both commercial breaks. And number five, J.D. Vance will make the final closing statement after winning a coin toss. Tim Walz, as a consolation, chose the podium on the right. Now, regarding the mics being on or off, this was a major point of contention in the two presidential debates earlier, where one candidate was muted while the other was talking. So I think it'll be interesting to see if this change will give one candidate or the other an advantage. For right now, though, let's go back to you guys at the desk.
All right, Dave, thank you.
And reporting today from the battleground state of Wisconsin, NTD's Iris Tao has been following the Republican ticket with insights on how J.D. Vance has been preparing for tonight's debate, as well as remarks made by former President Trump in Wisconsin. Let's take a look.
Campaigning in the battleground state of Wisconsin today, former President Trump will be soon talking to the press here in Milwaukee. Earlier today, in an economic speech in nearby Walkeny, Trump responded to the latest Iranian missile attack on Israel by saying it would have never happened if he were the president, while warning of a global catastrophe. Watch.
As you know, the world right now is spiraling out of control. I've been talking about World War III for a long time, and I don't want to make predictions because the predictions always come true. We're not going to make, but they are very close to global catastrophe, but nobody knows what's going on.
Trump vowed to restore peace if he returns to the White House. Trump also criticized the Afghanistan withdrawal and attributed the latest Iranian attack to what he called a lack of respect in the U.S. by other countries. And earlier in the statement on the attacks, Trump also cited intelligence suggesting that Iran might be trying to assassinate him and saying that Iran does not want him to win because they want to take advantage of America. It all comes as Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz will be facing off tonight in the CBS VP debate and what could be the last debate in this election cycle. Foreign policy is expected to be in the spotlight tonight on the stage. Campaigning in the battleground state of Wisconsin today, former President Trump talked to the press here in Milwaukee.
Middle East blowing up all over the place. It's a very dangerous time, most dangerous time since the end of World War II.
Reporting from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And turning our attention now back in studio with our panelists, Dante Mills, Amber Duke, Theron Bond, and Gerard Filitti. Gerard, let's talk about expectations tonight. We saw Dave at the Data Hub there outlining some of the rules tonight. We had Mike-gate last debate with the presidential candidates. Let's start with that. Mike's not muted. Does anybody have an advantage? What are some of your expectations?
I think that this debate will follow largely what we've seen the last two debates, even though we have the vice presidential candidates up this time. We will have a somewhat civilized conversation where they will try to score their points and sell their party's platforms, sell the top of the ticket while at the same time parrying blows. I think that they're pretty evenly matched when it comes to that in this format where you don't have the back and forth that you have had in previous years and previous debates. So it'll be interesting to see how they make the most of that, whether they push that envelope and get to the point where the moderators actually mute the mics.
Dante, does either of the candidates have an edge tonight, in your opinion?
I think it's pretty even coming in, but I disagree with one point. I don't think it's going to be civilized. This is a vice presidential debate. Why not, right? This is the time where you can make your points and come at the other side really hard, and you don't get that burden of being the top of the ticket where you have to show that kind of deference. And I think they're going to take advantage of that. I expect both sides to try and punch as hard as they possibly can, see how many points they can score, talk about the bosses of each particular candidate respectively. I think we're in for a show.
And Amber, on that note, when it comes to tonight, it does seem there's going to be more eyeballs than normal for a VP debate because this is probably the last debate before the election. Just, everything with this election, the compressed timeline, the candidates, especially on the Democratic ticket, being more unknown so far, all of these different things. And then with, what we're seeing in the Middle East here, how do you see foreign policy coming up, maybe more than it normally would for a VP debate tonight?
Right. Well, first, to your point, it is true that the Democratic candidates are more unknown, and that gives them both a higher potential upside, but also a higher potential downside. About a fifth of voters still say they're not entirely sure what platform Kamala Harris is running on. So that gives J.D. Vance an opportunity to try to define who she is as a candidate. And Tim Walz might be a little bit on defense in regards to that question. Now, on the foreign policy issue, this is a lot of baggage for the Biden campaign because we first saw Biden's approval ratings start to drop after the Afghanistan withdrawal, where America was essentially embarrassed on the world stage, seeing now the U.S. involved in another potential war, in addition to, of course, what happened on October 7th and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This could elevate foreign policy up to a top 5 issue for voters, which it doesn't typically tend to be during a general election campaign.
Darren, I want to get you to weigh in here. We're also seeing some reporting that Walz is, quite nervous going into this debate, according to his campaign staffers, that he said, he doesn't want to let down Vice President Harris in picking him as her running mate. How do you see this debate turning out tonight? Could someone actually lose? Often we talk about winners, but could there be losers?
If I was debating weird people, I'd probably be nervous too. However, I think if they run on their respective track records, it's obvious that Governor Tim Walz wins. He has clear policies that have won over people where he lives, and so those things are overwhelmingly well received across this nation. And what has Senator J.D. Vance done? I don't know any piece of legislation that he's put forth that has actually passed, despite how long he's been in office, which has not been very long. And so I think tonight the winner will be whoever can jab the fastest and the most, and also maintain their composure at the same time.
Now, Dante, this may very well be the last debate, whether it's presidential or vice presidential debate, that we see this cycle. Kamala Harris has said that she wants to debate former President Trump. I want to play some sound and get your reaction to that.
And in 2 days, I know we will cheer on Coach Walz when he debates J.D. Vance. Yeah. But listen, also, their debate should not be the last word. I'm trying to debate Donald Trump again, and I think he should debate again. The American people have a right to hear us discuss the issues. And as you say here in Las Vegas, I'm all in. I'm all in.
So Dante, I think that most might say that she overachieved in that last debate, at least exceeded expectations. Some might argue that she had some help from the moderators. We're not going to see that tonight. Who do you think that it would? And when I say not going to see that tonight, there won't be any fact-checking, live fact-checking. Who do you think would benefit from another debate?
Vice President Harris. That's why she's blowing the trumpet, trying to make it happen. And that's why former President Trump said it's not going to happen. And I don't blame him. He lost that debate pretty handedly. And when you pair that with the fact that there is a large part of this electorate that they still don't know who Vice President Harris is, if I'm Donald Trump, why would I give them the opportunity to learn? You just don't want to do that. And I think that's why there will be no second debate. I was surprised that he actually went forward with the first. I thought he just assumed he would do better than he did. But based on that outcome, there's no reason for him to take that debate stage again. It's not going to happen.
Now, Gerard, based on her performance, has the bar been raised for her this time? Does she run the risk of not performing quite as well?
Well, the loyalty answer is it depends on what type of debate you have. And the answer to that is if you have a debate on Fox News or Newsmax or on this station, it'll be markedly different than one that's seen as more partisan on the other side. And so it really does depend on who asks the questions, what the questions are, and what the format is. And by format, I don't mean mics muted, but I mean fact-checking or whether the moderators are actually participants in the debate. So I think the expectations for Harris have been raised by her performance, but I don't think that might be met or satisfied depending on how another debate would be carried out and on what network.
And Amber, when it comes to tonight's debate, and when it comes to fact-checking, that each candidate will be fact-checking each other instead of the moderators, how do you see that playing out tonight in terms of Walz and Vance?
Well, I think there's probably two things they're each most looking forward to from Tim Walz. He's probably excited to get into the debate over the Springfield migration crisis, which J.D. Vance has brought up, and of course, former President Trump brought up in the first debate. And then in the other direction, there was a report that came out today suggesting that Governor Walz has misrepresented another part of his record, this time whether or not he was in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square. I imagine J.D. Vance is going to bring that up, as well as Walz's misrepresentations of his service record.
And Theron, often when it comes to, VPs, we were talking about earlier, they're maybe more behind the scenes, less vocal, but we're already seeing both of them take jabs, Walz coining the term weird for J.D. Vance and really getting that onto the national stage with the, say, tensions already between them. When it comes to tonight's debate, how much will it be personality on each candidate versus, what their party stands for?
Well, we've seen a lot of both of their personalities on the campaign trail. We don't have to like it, but we've seen it. And honestly, we've seen more of their personalities than we have of the top of the ticket. And it's really unfortunate because the top of the ticket is who has the final say, but the presidential candidates are the supporting cast, and we get a lot more from them. So I think we're going to see their personalities. I think Walz is going to run more on his record. I think Vance is going to run on fumes and what he thinks the people want to hear. He's already told us he's a storyteller. I'm from the South, and when you tell a story, that's a lie. And he's already said that he's okay with that, and he's probably going to be okay with more of those.
I can say, let's get our popcorn ready. Both sides have some explaining to do.
Yes.
Right? You have Walz, who has some stories that may have been fabricated. And then the other side, you have Vance, who made some brazen, bold comments talking about, the cat mothers.
Childless cat ladies.
Childless cat ladies and all that. And I expect all of that to be on the table today. There is no one that's going to fact check outside. The moderators aren't doing that, so they have to call each other out. And that sets the stage for this to be a fiery debate.
But do you think, Dante, that, the childless cat ladies, the Springfield issue, and some of the other tit for tat in terms of, the governor's service in the military could be overshadowed by what we saw unfold today in the Middle East?
You would hope so. I mean, you come into this hoping that it's based in policy and that they have an opportunity to describe what they want to do. And I heard the former ambassador to Israel, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, was talking today about the United States' position there being passive. That's a shift. For him to call out the United States for being passive in Israel, for not being proactive in going on the offense, I think that was a bold statement today. And you wonder if you're going to hear about that. You would hope so. But I do think it's going to be a lot of, we're going to be sidetracked by some of those other issues, unfortunately, because especially J.D. Vance, he wants to go home at the end of the day and get that slap on the back from former President Trump saying, you made a lot of noise, I'm proud of you.
Yeah. An important discussion, but we are going to leave it right here just for now. We'll return after this very short break with a lot more, so stay with us.
We design Native Path products to restore essential nutrients missing from the modern diet. This is what being on the path is all about. We're more than a health and wellness brand, we're a community.
The 7th NTD International Piano Competition will take place at the Kaufman Music Center in New York City. Pianists from around the world will come together to revive the great piano masterpieces. Join us on this uplifting journey. The semifinals, finals, and the winner's concert will be open to audiences and live streamed from October 17th to the 19th. Get tickets now at 212-501-3330.
I didn't ask to lose my mother or to be abused at 5 years old. I didn't ask to be kicked out of my house with nowhere to go. I didn't ask for any of this. But I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there. Thanks to their love and support, and to generous people like you, I got what I needed to take control of my life.
For the young people who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations, Covenant House is there providing safety, hope, and a brighter future. Call or go online now. For a gift of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant House every night. 1 in 10 young adults will experience homelessness this year. Your gift can help reach them when they need it most.
I didn't ask for my parents and my family to disown me. I didn't ask to end up in a homeless shelter. The beauty of it all is that I found Covenant House.
The need is overwhelming, but your monthly support will make sure no young person is ever turned away. Call or go online right now to safeplacetosleep.org with your gift of just $19 a month. With your monthly donation, you'll receive this soft, comforting blanket as a reminder of the warmth and safety your gift will provide a young person tonight.
Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today. If there's no Covenant House, where would I be today?
Your monthly gift is urgently needed to reach young people in communities like yours who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations. Show them they're loved and not alone. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
And welcome back to The Nation Decides on NTD Television. And we're back here with our panel, political strategist and attorney Dante Mills, Washington editor for The Spectator Amber Duke, Democratic strategist Theron Bond, and attorney and political strategist Gerard Verlitti. And as we discussed earlier, the significant escalation in the Middle East is likely to make foreign policy a focal point this evening. It also throws strong leadership to the forefront as we inch closer to a broader war.
And on that, Dante, we are facing crises and looming ones on both the domestic and international front. The escalation in the Middle East with Iran, the port workers strike, with which JP Morgan analysts estimate could cost the U.S. billions, $5 billion per day. And with the destruction caused by Hurricane Helene, of course, in North Carolina and Tennessee, as we were just talking about earlier, and other southern states. Given all of that, how crucial is leadership in a time like this?
It's the most important thing that we're going to talk about, and I think that's what America is looking for, especially when you have someone like VP Harris who hasn't proven that. She's been the vice president. She hasn't had that top role, and people don't know if they can trust her or count on her yet. And I think she's working hard to try and show them they can. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the economy. Yes, these crises that we're going through internationally, that bombing happened today, so now it may raise the issues that we're talking about right now tonight. But ultimately, if you look at this strike, if the shelves are empty when it's time to go vote because the ports are closed, which means the warehouses are now empty and the supermarkets are empty, that's going to be a problem that nobody can avoid. And that's going to hurt the current administration because it's happening under their watch.
And Amber, on that note, when it comes to, tonight's debate with the VPs, how much do you see, Walz and Vance talking about that? Because, Trump has been president. He has a record. Harris a little less known because she was vice president. She does kind of have a record there as well, you could argue, under President Biden, right? How do you see that playing out, the question of leadership in tonight's debate?
That is going to be a big problem for the Harris-Walz campaign because although Walz has been in an executive position, again, Kamala Harris has not been at the top of an administration. And this past week when Hurricane Helene hit, she was doing campaign events up through Sunday night. Joe Biden was on the beach in Rehoboth and defended himself by saying, well, there's a such thing as phones. Donald Trump managed to beat them to one of the crisis zones by going to Georgia before either of them had ever returned to the White House. It recalled the time when the East Palestine train derailment occurred, and Trump managed to go to East Palestine before the Biden administration, including Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. From an optics perspective, that's not a win for the Harris campaign.
And Theron, just to get your thoughts on picking up where Dante left off in terms of, the looming port strike, the depth of that, how much risk does Kamala Harris being in the current administration have if things really start to go south and we see inflation and supply chain issues?
Well, the strike has already started, so it's already gone south, and it is going to cost billions per day as it continues, and so it would behoove them to find a solution. I've had several conversations with union leaders who say they might want to give them what they want in order for this country not to, just be destroyed over this. This is one of the largest strikes on the Eastern Seaboard in nearly 50 years, so it's affecting anything, everything, and everybody. What this is going to be about, though, is who is best financially for America for at least the next 4 years, and that started a couple of cycles ago. That started when former President Donald Trump was in office and how he did or did not handle the pandemic well. And it's also going to affect the Biden-Harris and also the potential Harris-Walz administration with how they handle a crisis. What you do in a time of crisis is very telling of what you can do even when things are great.
Gerard, talk to us about kind of the scope of when this starts. It's like Theron said, it's already started, it's already bad. How many weeks or days in could things start to get really bad and, the domino effects start to happen? And also talk to us about combining that with the crisis in the Middle East and gas prices starting to spike, crude oil.
The port strike could very well be the October surprise that we're all waiting for and we're all expecting, but not in this form. We can see things already starting to get bad from a perspective of how people feel. When you look on social media, you see that people are already worried about not finding supplies and the impact it's going to have on prices and hoarding. People are already looking at their local Costco and seeing what they need to stock up on. That's not good for the party that's in office because this is a superficial crisis. It's a created one. It's not one that we don't have supplies to bring into the country. It's a strike, and the president does have the power to compel these striking workers to go back to work while contracts are being negotiated. That has not happened yet. I think the American public will give it about 2 weeks before they start to feel the impacts of this in their pockets, and that will not be good for the incumbent if it's not resolved swiftly, because the crisis will drag on. The effects will be felt for months after people go back to work. So ultimately, this is a very pressing issue. More than anything else, it affects the economy and the outcome.
I'm just curious, if I may just jump in, to see if President Biden does step in. He has the authority to compel them. He said he won't. How long does he allow this to go on? You have to know, the audience has to know that 40% of imports come into this Eastern Seaboard. That's a huge part of what's coming into the country that's not going to be available to be moved into the ports and then off of the ports. So it's going to affect America. Let's see if he stays out of it or if he jumps in, gets involved for America and maybe for the political person.
But I think if he triggers Taft-Hartley, that's the end of the Harris-Walz campaign immediately. There are too many union members that are bought into Biden, that are bought into Harris, despite how Teamsters decided to not make an endorsement. It's a tough spot to be in, and it's going to be a really hard choice. But if he invokes Taft-Hartley, it's over.
That's right,
it's
especially now that even at the Republican convention, you saw some union leaders there. The Republicans are courting them heavy, and if Biden does that, it will be a strike against him and his administration.
And Amber, given all of that, right, with the port strike, we're seeing what what's coming out of Iran, the Middle East, those crises expanding, if you will. All of that, how do you see that feeding into the November results? Like, will that impact voters when they vote?
Well, all of this affects supply chains, right? In addition to that $5 billion a day loss to the economy, there's also going to be a backlog in goods getting throughout the U.S. And if you recall back in 2021, the Biden administration faced a similar issue very early on in the administration, where people were not able to get Christmas gifts, for example. And that was downplayed by the Biden administration at the time. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki referred to it somewhat flippantly from the podium as the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed. Of course, it's not just Christmas gifts for your kids, though. It's actually basic goods and supplies that you need in order to provide for your family. So with the economy already being the #1 issue on voters' minds, with another nail in that coffin, another snag in Americans being able to afford goods cheaply, with this massive inflation, 25% price increases over the past 4 years, that is incredibly damaging. It really can't be overstated how damaging that is for the incumbent.
And we'll be getting into that more, but we will be back after a very short break with more of our special coverage, so stick around.
Water, nature's ultimate cleaner. We drink it, we bathe in it. Think water, think steam, think clean. Now harness the power of water with the H2O X5 5-in-1 steam cleaning system.
I'm so impressed with the X5.
It's an all-in-one product. I can use it throughout my entire house.
It's cleaning, it's sanitizing, there's no chemicals in it. It's just steam.
This is unbelievable. There is no more odor. You could spend over $500 to purchase the products that the X5 5-in-1 Miracle replaces. Order your H2O X5 steam cleaning system, a $500 value, for just 4 easy payments of $43. Order now and we'll upgrade your X5 package. We'll add a 6th mode with a dusting and polishing wand. Valued at over $30, this extra bonus attachment makes your H2O X5 the H2O X6. That means your 10-piece system becomes a 12-piece system at no extra cost to you. All for just 3 easy payments of $43. Call or click right now.
Funny expression. There's a little scar right below his neck. The artist, on a trip to somewhere in South America, he met this kid who told him a story about himself. The technique is really good. As you'll see, like in the foreground, there's water on his face. The texture is so realistic, but then sort of in the back, you have these washed out colors, almost sort of fantasy feel. The whole of the picture is very balanced, and you still get that sense of harmony and warm light from it. The artist, he was really moved by the child's spirit. The child's from the slums, and so he looks around and he sees people who either get into drugs or they get into gangs, and he doesn't want that for himself. So he was telling this artist about how he's gonna make a better life for himself. The immense spirit and determination that the kid had really stuck with the guy, so that's why he painted such a large portrait of the child.
Many of us have been child fighters, but this little kid learned to defend himself in his own way. It's a great sacrifice that way. And so this is another form of strength, another form of endurance. We are capable of much more than we think. These children amaze us.
And welcome back to NTD's special coverage of the Nation Decides 2024. Let's go now to the Data Hub with NTD's election data analyst, Dave Martin, for a breakdown of the polls. Dave, before we get into the vice presidential candidates who will be debating tonight, who's leading in the battleground states?
Well, that's a good question. Let's go ahead and take a look at those swing states, starting here with the blue wall states. And this is according to an Emerson College poll among likely voters just taken 2 weeks ago. You see the three blue wall states here. First, Trump has a slight lead in Wisconsin by a point. That's 10 electoral votes there. But Michigan right now, Harris a slight 2-point lead. The all-important, though, Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. This is the biggest of them. He's got a 1-point lead. That is Donald Trump. Then you come down to North Carolina, been in the news a whole lot recently. This one surprised me because Trump has taken this. This is the only swing state he's won each of the last 2 elections, but Harris with a slight lead there. Georgia, meanwhile, also 16 electoral votes. Trump with a slight 3-point lead. Then you go out west. Arizona, Trump, a slight 1-point lead there. Nevada, 60 electoral votes there. They are tied. So it's 4 leads for Trump, 2 for Harris. But they are all within the margin of error. So it kind of depends on what day you ask who's actually winning.
And Dave, given those close margins, how important is the VP pick to voters?
Yeah, we've got a poll here for that. And this is among U.S. adults. This is a YouGov poll taken in July. 50% nearly said he was important, but a third of people actually said it was not important, and everybody else is really not sure or not voting there. Maybe it kind of depends on, who the candidate is. Now for Tim Walz, you can see kind of who they were going to kind of target with this pick. Born and raised in Nebraska, served 24 years in the National Guard, really all throughout the Midwest. And he's a former school teacher and assistant football coach. So he's kind of appeals certainly to that Midwestern audience. Now, has it actually worked out for him? Look at this. Biden and Harris. This is a Marist poll taken in June, three months ago. Among Midwesterners, Harris and Biden, 45% of the vote, while Trump, 53%. Now, 3 months later, Biden drops out, Walz becomes the candidate, and all of a sudden they pick up 4 points here, while Trump and Vance lose 3 points. That is a 7-point swing just by making that switch there, so kind of big there.
And on the Republican side, what's been Vance's impact here?
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. Now, Vance is among all Americans here. This is a poll taken June 30 to July 2nd, according to the YouGov poll here. As you can see here, don't know, 51%. That was a big one there actually for J.D. Vance. Despite being a senator, despite being an author of that Hillbilly Elegy book, most people just did not know him. So this was a quite interesting one here. Now, if you actually, if you go to September, go to September. Now he's been switched out. He's the VP candidate. All of a sudden, people more know him, but he does not have a very high favorable rating. Unfavorable, nearly 50%, 35% said favorable. Now, among Trump's base, quite a different story here, as you can see here. Among Trump's base here, 50% in June, July was favorable, 40% though, of course, didn't actually know him. And you fast forward 3 months and you look at this in September, 95% of them favorable ratings. So you have to ask, well, what changed in that time? Well, this guy has been all over the TV and media since then here. Look at these hits here. Local TV interviews, national print publications, national TV interviews, press conferences. What is that? 59 appearances here. That's more than Trump 4, Harris 3. Even Walz, what did he get, 13 there? So he's been all over. Apparently his base likes what he has to say. That's why he's got such a favorable rating, in my opinion anyway.
All right, Dave, thanks for that breakdown. And Steve, back to you at the desk.
And let's now go to our reporter on the ground in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What can you tell us there?
Good evening to you as well. So just now, former President Trump wrapped up his campaign event here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as the second stop here today. And that was a long campaign speech focused on the economy, school choice, as well as the current world situation. But also he took many questions after the speech in a kind of press conference format where he talked about a variety of topics. He told us that he's now heading to Houston, Texas. And his campaign just told me that there might be where he's watching a debate tonight on his plane. Meanwhile, today, he also talked about the expected performance of J.D. Vance, who he called a warrior. And the two-word advice that Trump would give Vance would be to have fun. Here's a clip of Trump talking about him. Watch.
Have fun. I said, J.D., have fun. It's true. J.D., that's right. We have a big deal going on. And I said, J.D., have a lot of fun. He's a smart guy. He's been amazing. He's been a real warrior. Top student at Yale. He was a very brilliant guy in so many different ways. And, you know, he's a very hard worker. He goes around and he's not afraid of the media. He'd stand here and he'd answer all of your questions. I have a lot of people that wouldn't do that. They don't like doing that. They get shouted at, and they don't like being shouted at. But JD is very much a warrior, very much a warrior. Thank you very much.
And of course, the biggest focus today in the news cycle would be the latest attacks by Iran on Israel. And then asked former President Trump about if he's worried about oil supply disruptions stemming from that, as we know that today the crude oil prices have already risen by over 2% following the attacks. He told me that, quote, yes, we have to be worried about that. And I also asked him about if he's worried about China potentially trying to seize the moment to take advantage of the situation in the Middle East to plan an attack on Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific theater. And he told me that China is going through a lot of problems itself, especially on the economy, especially given the latest government stimulus in China and trying to save the economy. And meanwhile, we also know that Trump today, earlier in his speech in Wisconsin, also warned about potential global catastrophe stemming from the Middle East. And today in his speech in Milwaukee, he also said that, quote, how he warned about the Middle East blowing up and also how it's the most dangerous time right now since World War II. So definitely foreign policy is expected to be the center of the spotlight tonight, as well on the VP debate stage. Back to you.
NTD's Iris Tao live in Wisconsin. Thank you, Iris. And back now to our in-studio panel. We have Dante Mills, Amber Duke, Theron Bond, and Gerard Felitti. Amber, I want to get your thoughts back to the issue of the Middle East. And, you know, former President Trump, he's been, you know, tried and tested as president. He's often talked about the strength of his campaign is the fact that when he was president, there were no issues that we're seeing right now. I want to play some sound of something the former president said and get your reaction.
Under my administration, we had no war in the Middle East. We had no war in Europe. We had harmony in Asia. We had no inflation. We had no Afghanistan catastrophe. Instead, we had peace, peace, peace. We had a lot of peace.
How much do you think that message will resonate with voters?
Well, I think it's an important one when there is so much chaos going on overseas. And the Democrats have had a difficult time combining their progressive base, which has expressed a very heavy pro-Palestine sentiment, with the Biden administration's historical support for Israel. Now, Kamala Harris has said that she wants to continue the Biden administration's policy on Israel, but does that risk missing those voters that went uncommitted in the primaries and otherwise have been expressing a more pro-Palestinian sentiment? We saw an Arab Americans for Harris group say during the Democratic National Convention that they couldn't give their support in good conscience because there was not a Palestinian activist who spoke from the DNC stage. But then they went back and offered that support immediately following the DNC. So I think it's most likely that those voters are going to come home for the Democrats, but it's definitely something that they're thinking about as they're responding to this conflict. And on a broader policy level, the Biden administration, and in the debate tonight, I'm sure J.D. Vance will bring this up, has been a little bit more deferential to Iran and taking some of that Obama-era Iran appeasement policy in terms of freeing up a lot of money for Iran through hostage exchanges, which money's fungible, right? Even if you say that that money is earmarked for humanitarian purposes, the reality is that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror. Anytime that you're giving them billions of dollars, unfortunately, they are going to use it to propagate chaos like what we're seeing right now.
Theron, to Amber's point, how much does this complicate things for the Democratic Party, specifically when you're talking about the swing state of Michigan that does have a relatively large Arab American voter base there, and in a state that could come down to a few thousand votes?
I think there are two things happening here. One, it's irresponsible for former President Trump to say that no wars happened under his watch. We had a whole pandemic and he didn't handle it very well, or at least not equitably for all Americans to be prosperous after that. The second thing is the uncommitted movement is large. It's hundreds of thousands of people. It's probably in the millions now. And with the missile attack today on Israel by Iran, it's not going to make things any better. What they want to see from Vice President Harris are strong, firm stances on how she's going to deal with foreign matters if and when things like what happened today arise. Like right now, America is in the twilight zone, and the uncommitted movement wants to know how we can get out of that. And frankly, a lot of other voters do too. You
mentioned the pandemic. I just want to follow up. I mean, the pandemic, as we all know, it originated in communist China. much to do because they allowed it to leave and sent flights outside of China. Governor Tim Walz's history of China has been somewhat controversial. Do you expect that to come up tonight, and how do you think he will handle it?
Absolutely, and Senator Vance thinks it's probably going to be a winning issue. But at the time, he wasn't president and he wasn't vice president, and now he's a governor. So how much leeway did he have? What type of leadership position was Tim Walz in then? Because he wasn't Governor Tim Walz. But I do think it'll come up. But I would hope that Governor Tim Walz will then say, Senator Vance, what have you done? You know, whether it be good or bad, what can you say is admirable in your track record? And Senator Vance can't really say much. He had a somewhat great movie, depending on if you watch it. He wrote a good book, but what else? And what did you take from those life experiences in order to show how you will serve the American people? Because right now we don't really see that.
And Dante, when it comes to this question of, foreign policy, leadership, all of these different issues, whether that's domestic or abroad, like we're seeing with Iran right now, when it comes to, former President Trump, many people say he was very strong on foreign policy. He has that strong track record when it comes to the Biden-Harris administration, as we were talking about earlier, the Afghanistan withdrawal and how the world saw that. With Vice President Harris now running for president and Walz tonight, how do you see, the Democratic Party navigating this when there is that massive uncommitted vote, if you will? How do you see that playing out?
Not very well right now. President Biden is nowhere to be found. And it's unfortunate, but it's true, right? And you can't hide from the truth that we've had natural disasters happen in this country. We had the bombing in Israel today, and he's not in the forefront. So then you look and say, okay, well, who's next? This is the perfect opportunity for Vice President Harris to take the reins and show that she's a leader, and she hasn't done that. And that's going to be a problem because one thing, former President Trump has a large personality. And when he goes into a room, he makes people believe that he's going to be the biggest, baddest person there, and it makes America feel safe, right? So you have to match that if you're on the Democratic side, and I think they're dropping the ball and not taking advantage of opportunities to show the American people that they can.
And I think part of that is due to a lot of the team that was around President Joe Biden when he was presumably the nominee, and now a lot of those folks are on Vice President Harris's team, and they're not doing her good service. They're not, and it's really unfortunate because now our democracy is at stake, and it's another critical election. That's what we're selling to people all across this country. It's a critical election year, and we must get it right. But are we really doing what it takes to get it right? And I do agree with Dante. This was a prime opportunity for Vice President Harris to simply show up and show up big. I mean, she technically is in the administration right now. So what could she do herself, and what could she do to push President Joe Biden to do a little bit more?
But speaking of Kamala's team, and also going back to the question of the uncommitted vote, Kamala may have said herself that she supports Israel and will continue giving them weapons. However, that's not what her team is saying. On her team, she has people who hate Israel, who hate Jews. And that's been a major problem because that's been sending the message to the Jewish community, we cannot trust her. And it's been sending a message to the uncommitted that, well, actually, we can't vote for her. So I think that her team has been doing her a service when it comes to that delegation to the Michigan voters, to the millions of uncommitted voters around the country. But that team is also not doing her favors when it comes to overall foreign policy, because we have to wonder what the truth is. Is it what Kamala is saying, or is it what her policy advisors are telling her? And will this play out in Taiwan? How will this play out in Iran? How will this play out in Ukraine? We don't know the answer to that because Kamala has not yet been pushed hard on those answers.
It's a lack of consistency. And it's really unfortunate.
Topic that we will be unfolding more as the show continues, but we are going to take a very short break, and we'll be back with more of our special coverage in just a few minutes.
We design Native Path products to restore essential nutrients missing from the modern diet. This is what being on the path is all about. We're more than a health and wellness brand, we're a community.
I'm Ilka. I live with my daughter and with my grandchildren. There's a sense of comfort that comes with eating a good meal. We try to make the most, of what we have. We have rent to pay, and then there are lights and there are gas. And while my daughter and I both work, it still just doesn't seem like there's enough to go around sometimes.
Every day, millions of our neighbors face hunger, including 1 in 5 children, and food costs keep rising. Please call or go online right now to join Feeding America with your gift of just $19 a month, only 63 cents a day. Your monthly support can fill plates with nutritious food for families across the country and in your community, thanks to a nationwide network of food banks and volunteers.
If you were over and playing with us, you were part of our family and you were going to eat. A real cook can take nothing and make something.
No one should ever have to wonder if they will have enough to eat, and our neighbors are working hard to feed their families every day. Call or go online now. Visit helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month. 98% of donations go directly to help millions of people facing hunger from coast to coast and in your own community. Use your credit card and you'll get this exclusive canvas grocery bag as a thank you for joining hands with people across America to help end hunger.
Some of the lessons that I hope that my family will take, it is important to treat people the way that you want to be treated. I have carried on the tradition of loving people through food.
Please call right now or go online to make a monthly gift at helpfeedingamerica.org. Your support helps our neighbors bring food home to their families.
Do you know that Cars for Compassion is the best way to donate your car? Through this non-profit program, you can not only help us keep bringing the world independent and daringly truthful journalism, but also significantly impact the life of somebody who needs a vehicle. The Epoch Times fights misinformation and big tech censorship by being independent and unbound to advertisers. Every single contribution to Cars for Compassion is a powerful endorsement of our unwavering mission. All you have to do is go to carsforcompassion.org and let us know about your car, and we'll schedule a pickup time and email you a tax-deductible receipt. To do this, just click the link below, support truth, compassion, and hope. Donate your car right now at www.carsforcompassion.org.
NTD News, the fastest growing independent news source in America, bringing you breaking news from around the world. Expert analysis, investigative reporting, and original award-winning documentaries. We're known for our uncensored China coverage you won't find anywhere else. We cover the stories that affect you and shape our world without the political noise. We report from the heart with you in mind. Watch us right here on NTD News.
And we're back with more of our special coverage of The Nation Decides. I'm Tiffany Meier.
And I'm Steve Lance. And very shortly, we'll be seeing the vice presidential candidates, Democrat Tim Walz and Republican J.D. Vance, debating right here in New York City. You can watch the CBS News vice presidential debate on CBS or simulcast right here on NTD News starting at 9 p.m. Eastern.
And turning back to our panel now, Dante Mills, Amber Duke, Theron Bond, and Gerard Filitti. Now, polls are showing, time and again that the economy is the biggest issue this election, while Trump and Harris actually have some similarities when it comes to economic policy, especially on some taxes. They differ greatly on tariffs. So,
tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, I'm going to, and I say this in all sincerity, he's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues. And one must be serious and have a plan.
Now, Harris has been critical of Trump's tariffs, criticizing them multiple times, including at the DNC, saying they make things more expensive for the American consumer. However, President Biden actually kept the majority of Trump's tariffs at least, the ones on products coming in from China. In fact, he just strengthened them last month in September. Now, Harris was pushed on this point during a recent MSNBC interview. When it comes to the topic of tariffs, Gerard, I want to get your thoughts on this. How do you see, that playing out? We did see, President Biden also going after President Trump when it came to the topic of tariffs, but he did keep them and even increase them. And then we've seen, Harris going after them as well. When it comes to the actual topic of tariffs, how do you see, Harris dealing with that? She hasn't really made her stance clear on what she would do.
Look, as we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years, tariffs do work under the right conditions and with the right enforcement. We have seen this especially with trade with Asia. We have seen this with trade with Latin America as well. And at least with Donald Trump, we had a policy that made sense. Even though the Democrats currently don't agree with it, they still kept a lot of those tariffs. I'm not hearing specifics from Kamala Harris, though. That's the problem. She seems to be against tariffs in principle, but she's not providing any alternative. She's not providing any vision for how she would handle trade imbalance or other economic issues outside of what she's already said, which is basically a denial of the Trump platform. So really what we need to see is details, and those have been far and few and far between.
We have to bring manufacturing jobs back to this country, or this country may not survive. It's that serious. We don't produce hardly anything here. We import everything in. We can't allow that to happen. You can only fix it by one of two ways. Taxing things that are coming in to make that too expensive and make things have to be manufactured here, or give tax breaks so that people can open manufacturing plants and start to produce things here. There has to be some kind of combination. I think tariffs is a good thing, but they have to be rolled out the right way and kind of monitored the right way to make sure that people aren't running goods through other countries like we've seen in Latin America and doing things like that. But I think Vice President Harris has to take a strong stance on that, because we're talking about the unions and stuff that's starting to look away from the Democratic Party, and they've been their base for a long time, and that's a problem. So we have to bring those manufacturing jobs back. Something has to be done. I think she should take a strong stance.
Now, Amber, we've heard about job creation from both campaigns. What are the key differences between the approaches of Vance and Walz, and which one do you think resonates better with working families?
Well, we have seen some commentary on this lately where the Harris-Walz campaign has accused Trump of losing jobs, which is technically correct if you include the pandemic, but prior to that, he actually increased manufacturing jobs by about 400,000, which is this key voting demographic that we're talking about. The Harris-Biden administration, or Biden-Harris administration rather, has not seen as much of an increase. I think it's somewhere around 100 to 150,000. But more importantly, the fundamental difference that we're seeing is exactly what Dante is talking about, which is this idea that American manufacturing needs to be reshored and American workers have to have good, high-paying jobs. And unfortunately, under the Biden administration, in the most recent jobs report, we saw that most of the job growth has come from foreign-born workers, and American-born workers have actually lost about 1 million jobs. So when people who are working class are going to the voting booth in November, that's something that they're going to think about. And regardless of the economic gains that the Biden administration is touting, they're saying, well, I haven't been seeing that in my life.
In Theron, it's the vice presidential debate, but it feels as though that the stakes have been raised to a certain degree in this election cycle. So when it comes to tonight, how do you see both candidates attacking each other, if you will, or responding to each other? Are they going to be aiming more at the top of the ticket, or are they going to be talking about themselves?
Oh, I think they're going to go for one another. I think they may be inclusive of the top of the ticket, but they're going to go blow for blow for one another. We've already seen it somewhat on the campaign trail. We're going to see it highlighted tonight, and whoever does it the best will win the night, and it's going to boost the top of the ticket, even if it's just momentarily, a little bit post-debate. But here's the thing. Let's assume that the Harris-Walz campaign gets a bump. Well, what are they going to do with it? If she's willing to clarify her policies and stand on business and stand firm, then she'll continue to ride that wave. But if Trump and Vance do better and they're able to continue to amplify their message after the debate, which is something that they both do, even if we don't agree with what's being said, they are personality driven, and oftentimes people want to know that they feel relatable, and they are more relatable to the American public personality wise, and right now that's what's winning over voters.
If I can just say, people talk about this Harris campaign and say they haven't made any flaws. And I don't think they have. They've run a tight ship. It's done well, but they're still even in the polls. And they also haven't taken any risk. They're running a very safe campaign, and that's not helping them. They're not making big mistakes, but they're also not getting that explosive attention and gains that they could if they took a little bit of risk. So we'll see if that starts tonight.
Yeah.
And Gerard, the debate is just about to start in a few minutes. What are your final expectations and what we can expect tonight?
Wow, my final expectations are going to be that we're going to see which one of these two gentlemen is the most middle-class gentleman of all.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think we will see some dynamite. I think we'll see some great pre-arranged sound bites that will be really hard-hitting, but we will also see which one is more appealing to the masses. And that's really the goal here. It's to appeal to their demographic, to appeal to people from the Midwest, from the swing states, people who are not extreme on either side of the policy, who want a better life for their families. And now we will see a race towards the middle before we see the race towards polar opposites tomorrow in the post-event wrap-up.
Amber?
Well, I think Theron hit the nail on the head earlier, which is that there's been some inconsistency coming out from the Kamala Harris campaign. And Tim Walz has, frankly, an opportunity here to help clarify some of those stances on behalf of his boss. We have seen differing statements come from Kamala Harris's campaign advisors from a number of issues, from immigration to the economy to electric vehicle mandates and Green New Deal era policies, whereas Kamala Harris has not really said any of those changes between 2019 and 2024 herself. So I think it's time for the campaign to start saying from the candidates, not the staffers, what is the policy and why has she changed so much from her last presidential run?
And with that said, it is the end of our pre-debate coverage. We'll be back once the CBS News vice presidential debate is over.
And once again, you can watch it on CBS or simulcast right here on NTD News starting in just a few moments.
I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And we'll see you soon on The Nation Decides.
The 7th NTD International Piano Competition will take place at the Kaufman Music Center in New York City. Pianists from around the world will come together to revive the great piano masterpieces. Join us on this uplifting journey. The semifinals, finals, and the winner's concert will be open to audiences and live streamed from October 17th to the 19th. Get tickets now at 212-501-3330.
The tempting online world is encroaching on our campus. Is unplugging cables and confiscating phones the solution to protect our children? No, we just need a clean multimedia platform. Join Ganjing Campus to leverage premium channel features, professional development courses, and kindness event toolkits tailored for teachers. Build a truly positive and interactive classroom community. Foster a pure and delightful learning environment for children.
Performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. See it at least once in your lifetime. Shen Yun. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
They're just young people, hungry, homeless, and vulnerable. Covenant House is helping young adults facing homelessness. We're providing safe shelter to thousands, but the need is overwhelming. Please call or go online now. With your gift of $19 a month, we'll send you this blanket as a reminder of the comfort your gift provides a young person tonight. You'll provide safe shelter, hot meals, and medical care. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
There are real consequences to controlled media. And NTD's founders know them firsthand. Our freedom of thought is the price. This is the lesson that guides us in everything we do.
Yeah, so there's the tear gas there.
We know the value of a free society. And we take seriously the responsibility to preserve it. We are NTD.
And welcome back to our post-debate analysis of the first and likely only vice presidential debate between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance. Coming back now in studio with our guests, Dante Mills, Amber Duke, Theron Bond, and Gerard Felitti. Quite the debate there. It was something that sort of struck me, Amber. It was quite civil, and I thought we saw that when we let it breathe there at the end, where both candidates shook hands. Their wives came on stage, shook hands. It seemed to be much more cordial. You had a handshake in the beginning. What were some of your initial takeaways?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I was kind of surprised, as I think most of the panel was, but there was permission given on both sides to be civil, right? You heard Senator Vance not really going after Tim Walz on some of the inconsistent statements that he's made about his record. And he even gave him a little bit of a pass, saying that he was essentially the scapegoat for Kamala Harris's policies and that he was in a, quote, tough position in trying to defend them. And Governor Walz returned the favor by treating Vance with a similar level of respect. And that really lowered the temperature until the very end of the debate, when we saw them sparring pretty heavily on the question of democracy in terms of Vance's record in relation to January 6th and his view of how Trump handled that. And then vice versa when J.D. Vance went after Tim Walz for his support of government censorship. Dante, any clear winner or loser in your eyes?
I don't know. The American people, I will tell you, I feel more informed after this debate. They talked about a lot of policy issues. You would have hoped that we had a similar debate with the top of the ticket, because we really got a feel for, I feel like I know these guys now, at least a little bit about them, and not just what you read in the headlines or, some one comment that may have come across. You got a sense of who they are as people. And I think the American people were the winners of this debate, because we got a chance to hear things be fleshed out in a cordial manner. And like they said during the debate, we want these politicians to come together to battle their ideas. They make each other stronger and better, and then better politics come out of it. And I think this was a good example of our political system in action. And I was proud of the performance that both of them had today.
And Gerard, given that, how do you think, both of them did, and also if that's enough to move the needle, among voters after what we just saw?
Well, I think what moves the needle among voters is not necessarily for who they're going to vote for, but the concept of hope triumphing over despair, that we see that civility is possible, that we can have a different type of discussion in politics, and we can come back to this perhaps in the next election and see something different than what we've seen for the last 8 years. I think I share a sense that many people have already texted me during this debate that they kind of wish that these guys were at the top of the ticket. It would make things more interesting. I do think that, and we will discuss the specifics, of course, but I do think that J.D. Vance came out very strong. I think he came across as very reasonable, and he dispelled a lot of negative expectations that people may have had about him coming into this, being on the Trump ticket. I think Tim Walz did a solid performance, but really I think as among the two, J.D. Vance really stood out as having done a very good job with this debate.
And Theron, given what we just saw, maybe a more civil debate than what many headlines at least seem to be predicting here, do you think this will encourage more Americans to come out and vote now that we seem to know at least these two candidates more?
I think it may put people in a better position to understand where each of the campaigns stands, but ultimately, while we did hear from J.D. Vance and Tim Walz tonight, they're not the top of the ticket. And if we were to see this from, say, Donald Trump and Vice President Harris, then now we would really be talking about a different ball game. And so I think what happens now with the top of the ticket after tonight could be a true determination of where each of the campaigns is going to go.
Yeah, you're interested to see how they piggyback off of it and how they spin it, right? They're going to go into their spin rooms and try and announce a winner. But it's interesting to see if those campaigns take the high road and kind of congratulate them both on sharing ideas, or if they pick out one moment that they can really try and dog the other person, will the campaigns follow what these two vice presidential candidates did tonight?
And not surprising, the debate started with the conflict in the Middle East. Both candidates were actually asked if they would support or oppose a preemptive strike on Iran. Neither answered the question directly right away and took a chance to introduce themselves. Let's play a soundbite.
What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed.
And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. It is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
So, Amber, when it comes to this very complicated issue in the Middle East, what message do you think resonates most with the American people?
Well, Vance was the only one who answered the question by saying that he supports Israel's right to make a determination on what they think the best reaction is to this Iranian strike. I didn't hear Tim Walz say what he thought Israel should do and if he supported their right to make that decision. And I also think he had a major misstep in that first answer. And of course, we have to remember that most people are probably not tuning in for the full 90 minutes. So those early questions really matter. And he decided to immediately pivot to attacking Trump. And when you have a campaign where most voters say that they need to know more about the Harris-Walz campaign, using your first question to go after the other guy instead of making it clear where you stand and immediately developing that trust and that personal relationship with the viewers was a mistake.
Dante?
Yeah, I think Amber's right that you can't expect everybody to tune in the entire time and take the ride, and those early moments are critical, but I'm going to give them both some grace here because this was a huge stage, and I think they both felt the weight of that, and I'm glad they did because it meant they were prepared and they gave us really some good information tonight. But the beginning of the debate was a little rough for Tim Walz. I think it was. He was a little nervous, you can tell, in his speech and the way he was responding, and I think in those nerves his immediate reaction was to kind of go on the attack, but once he settled in, he was good. I do want to hear, though, from not just Vice President Harris as part of his campaign, but President Biden, what we're doing about Israel, and we did not hear that tonight. If we're going to support whatever the action they deem necessary, if we're going to go alongside with them and be offensive, or if we're just going to support them and make sure they have any weapons that they need and any support that they need in regards to airstrikes and things like that. So I do want to hear that, and I didn't hear that tonight.
Yeah, I think that's what's been interesting, and I think the American people want to know that too. We've been funding weapons that they've been using, and how long and how far will that go? We want to know, that's everybody sitting at this table, like we have a hand in funding that, and is that something that we want to continue to live with? And those are questions that we need to answer like now, today, not by the next administration. We need to know these yesterday, today, tomorrow, and through November 5th, because now it seems like a ceasefire is completely off the table, if it ever was. There's been some discourse between Biden and how Netanyahu has handled things, yet we are still giving them money. So when does the money in the gravy train stop based on what we feel is okay, and how far does that okay go?
Well, and Vance gave the only intellectually honest answer there, that we look to America's allies, in this case Israel, the only democracy in the region who's been facing decades of attack from Iran and Iranian proxies, and you look at them and what they need, and if they need a preemptive strike, if they need our support, then we give them that support. That's what allyship means, a strategic alliance, a strategic partnership. How are our allies in Taiwan, how are our allies in Europe, in NATO supposed to expect anything from the United States if we're not consistent with our basic principles? And that is looking to our allies and seeing what they need and following through.
And actually, Dante, given what we just addressed here, and when it comes to Iran and what we saw there, with the responses, if you will, that we heard from the candidates, we did also hear from former President Trump earlier today talking that he's been warning about World War III. Given all of these issues, do you think following this debate and what we saw in the presidential debate between Trump and Harris that the American people is confident in the leadership, whoever that may be, when it comes to handling issues like this?
Right now, my honest answer has to be no. Again, we talked about this earlier, where we don't have somebody grabbing the microphone and saying, everybody relax. That did not happen during the natural disasters and the hurricanes that just swept through the southern region of the country. It did not happen after today, right? It was a phone-in. You did not see someone take the podium and say, we're going to make sure that you are safe and we're going to make sure our allies are protected. That didn't happen. So I don't think we have that. And I think when former President Trump was in office, people felt secure in that way. And it may have been in part because foreign leaders thought he was crazy enough to do anything and just didn't want to test him, but it worked, right? It worked. So I think Vice President Harris has a long way to go, but not a lot of time to assure people that she can protect us and keep us safe both in-house and abroad.
And Gerard, you and I have spoken about the Middle East a lot. Given what we're seeing now, what would you like to see from both parties and both candidates, either the presidential candidates or the VPs, especially when it comes to messaging and actions?
Moral clarity and legal clarity that what we're seeing is the attempted genocide of the Israeli people, of the Jewish people in the Middle East, and that the United States stands opposed to that and will do what it takes to stop it and support the Israeli people. And in the United States, we see the rise in anti-Semitism. We need a clear and unequivocal statement of support by the White House, by the president, by our elected officials that this is unacceptable and needs to stop. And we have not seen that on both counts.
I can't say, if I can just jump in, I do want to mention that Vice President Harris has made her position clear, that she supports Israel 100%, she'll provide weapons, but she also said the Palestinians have a right to life. And I don't think that those two things are at odds. I think both can exist at the same time. I think she's been clear about that. Now, there has clearly been an escalation today, and we want to know where we're going to go moving forward. But she has made that position very clear and been strong that she supports Israel, but no one deserves to be, erased from the face of the earth, or simply, or people need to die needlessly. And I think those two things operate together.
And I don't think anyone is saying that people need to die needlessly. I agree with you that she has been clear about supporting Israel, but she has not been clear to what extent that support goes. And there have been discussions on whether she would stop weapons shipments or what she would do, whether the members of her staff support or oppose things like boycotting Israel or providing an arms embargo. So I think that's something that needs to be answered more clearly. And I don't think she has the moral courage to do that right now because she risks losing votes.
Actually, she has said she'll make sure they have everything they need. And the reason we know she said this is because members of the uncommitted movement are still uncommitted. So she has said, I will give them whatever they need. And let's not forget, every night she sleeps next to a Jewish man. And so I believe that he has heavy influence on her policy making, especially when it comes to those things.
With that said, we also did see Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer sending out a statement earlier, right before the debate, saying that pretty much the United States will continue to stand by our ally in Israel and support their right to defend itself. So we'll see how that translates into the administration. Just switching gears a little bit, the moderators also zeroed in on Waltz over his visits to China, particularly his time there surrounding the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. A reminder for viewers at home, that's when the Chinese Communist Party opened fire on unarmed protesters who had gathered to ask for democracy and better education. Let's play that soundbite.
My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war.
Just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this, so I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in, and from that I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Amber, what do you make of the governor's response there?
It was a really bad answer, and I think it was political malpractice that he wasn't better prepared for that question, considering this is a news story that broke today and was almost surely, if not going to be asked about by the moderators, was going to be brought up by his opponent. And to call yourself a knucklehead on stage when you're running for the second highest office in the world is not a choice that I would make if I were trying to reassure Americans that I am going to be able to execute in favor of their best interests. And this guy has a history of supposedly misspeaking. I mean, he gave a similar excuse when pressed about inconsistencies with his service record, saying that it was the result of his bad grammar. He has told all kinds of weird mistruths about whether or not he seasons his food, about whether or not his wife used IVF or other fertility treatments, and his staff has made misstatements about a DUI arrest that he supposedly pretended he was deaf to try to get out of. So I don't think that's good enough when this is a clear pattern of behavior for him. And he's basically fashioning himself on that stage as some sort of Homer Simpson bumbling idiot type, which again, when you're running for a very high office, is just not acceptable.
Dante, certainly not the governor's best moment.
It's not, and he should have been better prepared for that question. I think the second half of that, where he just said, I misspoke, I went there that summer and my timing in that story was off, that he should have just led with that and let it move on. I do think, though, that part of being a true leader and a good leader is being able to acknowledge when you make a mistake. There should be no expectation of perfection. Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make errors. But if you can acknowledge that, that makes you a true leader. So I don't think him saying, listen, I was a knucklehead on that is the worst thing in the world. The next question after that for Vance was when he, in fact, made comments about Donald Trump that he took back. And he said, I was wrong on that. I learned some stuff after and it changed my stance. So I think that they were presented with opportunities to correct some things. They both did it, but just Walz took a little time getting there and he should have been more prepared and just did it from the beginning.
If only our presidential candidates both could do that, I think the American people would be a lot more open to making a decision about who they want to serve in the presidency and not necessarily continuing to be apathetic or uncommitted. Like we saw it on the stage tonight, both of those vice presidential candidates admitted in their own way that they made a misstep or had misspoken. But imagine if Vice President Harris could do that about the things she shifted on. Imagine if former President Donald Trump could do that on the things that he shifted on. We might really have a real election happening here and it not just be about a personality contest.
Given the differing responses we did see in tonight's debate when, the candidates were pressed on various stances, Gerard, when it comes to the American people, the ones who tuned in tonight, how do you think they viewed that when it comes to, admitting or not admitting or, going around certain past statements?
I think personal responsibility and accountability are key phrases that many Americans hold as values. And I think seeing that candidates can take accountability when they misspeak or when they're wrong or when they have a change in their policy or their thought, that's an important thing for most people. So I think that played well to everyone. And I think that both candidates did themselves a service by being so forceful and clear about their transition, if you will, within their thinking and in their stances and even in being able to admit that they were wrong about something.
Dante, I think you've spoken about this before where you wish that, we did have a more open environment where especially say someone like Harris can admit if she's changed on certain stances so far as Amber laid out, right? We haven't heard directly from her. It's mostly her campaign saying she's maybe flip-flopped on certain stances. We know where she used to stand. We don't really know where she currently stands on several issues. When it comes to admitting that you've maybe learned more information and changed your stance, how would that help this country move ahead, especially when you hear so many people talking about it being a very divisive climate right now?
I think it would open us up to understanding each other and recognizing that we all have room for growth, right? If our leaders would say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when I heard about fracking, I didn't really know as much as I know now, and I thought this was the right way to go. But turns out, I learned some stuff in the last 5 years. I talked to the governor of Pennsylvania and someone from Ohio who told me and showed me the importance, and it makes sense. And I was wrong then. That would ease so many conversations and allow us, and that's why it's important. I know we don't want these elections to be a personality contest, but that's why we need that kind of stuff from our leaders because we follow that. The rest of the American people will be able to say, well, I know we're a different race, or I know you're an immigrant from here. I don't really know about that country. Tell me about it. And maybe my stance will change. So I think our leaders doing that opens up the gates for us to be more open to other people, and that's what we need to see in the White House.
And as we were speaking about earlier, the economy is top of mind for voters, and a question about how they'd pay for their economic plans in tonight's debate quickly turned into a debate over whether or not experts have all the details. So let's refresh our memory on that exchange.
I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it.
Gerard, I want to zoom in on that. Vance was talking about, the experts predicting for years if we ship all our manufacturing over to China, it's going to decrease prices. It's going to make life here much better. We're going to have more money in pocket to, spend on other things. But over the years, we've seen that hasn't really played out, at least when it comes to communist China, as many have noted, since the World Trade Organization joined and let China in. Instead of making China, a communist country, more free and democratic, it seems the free markets are now less free. Given that, when it comes to the experts, what do you make of that, and what is the solution?
For me, it's easy to talk about experts because as a trial lawyer, I will get an expert to say what I want him to say. And it really does come down to a lot of trials as the battle of the experts and which one is more believable and which one is more credible to the jury, in this case, the American public. So I do think that Vance has a point. We have to be careful which experts we listen to. And when you do have a track record of listening to experts who tell you things like the economy will be better, like China will be freer, like we will do better and have more disposable income if we outsource everything to China or jobs to Mexico, and that does not prove to be true, then you kind of want to change your experts and get ones who actually know what they're talking about. So I think that Vance has a very good point, but that doesn't really answer the question as to what is the best policy going forward, because when the experts don't agree, and they don't, you still need that executive, you need that president to make that final decision. And what is Trump guided by? What is Vance guided by? What is Kamala Harris guided by? And we still don't know the answers to those questions.
And Dante, on that note, right, when it comes to this statement, A, do you think Trump was right when he said the experts got it wrong here? But then B, to Gerard's point, what, experts should we be listening to?
I think Gerard just said one of the most important things of the day. What are they guided by? Because again, sometimes nobody is perfect. So sometimes the experts or a politician is going to get something wrong, but their intent, right? Do you truly believe that they have the best interest of the American people in mind? That's what we want to know. I do think that the experts got it wrong on manufacturing. There's nothing like this nation is built on hard work, right? So hard work meaning you start off in the mailroom or a low level on an assembly line. You work your way up over the years, and by the end, you're running that line, you're a supervisor. Now you can buy a house because your salary went up. You have that stability, you have a retirement fund. We don't have that anymore. And that's a problem. It's killing a lot of American cities. So I do think the experts got it wrong. I don't think it's too late to turn that around, but I think we need to be firm and make sure we do everything possible to get those jobs back here to stay, and just follow our heart, as Trump has said, as long as we're electing people that we truly believe have our best interests in mind.
It does seem when it comes to at least China, right, many of those were aspirational and coming from a good place, and it just happens that the system they were working with played by different rules. Right now we are seeing Donald Trump Jr. right there. Let's listen in and see what he has to say.
Tens of thousands of good jobs for hardworking Americans canceled and gone, right? So we import oil from Iran now, the world's leading state sponsor of terror, launching missiles today at Israel from Venezuela, a regime we didn't recognize. Yeah, minor details like that. Yeah, you call someone what they've called him for long enough, and obviously that was on purpose, but they couldn't take him out with impeachment. They're trying to bankrupt his businesses, to try to put him in jail. Everyone knows what's going on. I think they're fed up of it.
I heard him talk directly to moderates over and over tonight, which is so important because some of these key battleground states, it's going to come down a couple hundred votes, maybe a couple thousand votes. What's it going to take in these final couple weeks here? I mean, we're less than 40 days out. What's it going to take to just break through to those people?
Listen, I think they get it. Obviously, it's not a fair fight, whether it's a debate that's sort of biased or just general coverage, right? I understand how hard it is, and I understand where I come from, too. And I'm blessed. For average Americans right now, the people I hang out with on weekends, they're struggling. It hurts. They see that each and every day. They just have to look at where they are. Do you think your kids are going to have a better future? I don't think so. Like I said, I think we were achieving that. Low income wages for the lowest income earners were going up under Trump. That's gone. That's been displaced. Each and every policy that my father did started working, and that was against a brutal media. That was against rhino Republicans doing whatever they could. So it's always hard to break through because you have $1 trillion in mainstream media literally functioning as the marketing department for the other side. They're doing the whole Kamala Harris is a moderate. It's like, well, what about her record? Oh, well, that doesn't count. It's different now. It's not different. It's never going to be different.
You look proud tonight. I mean, I see it in your face. You sound emotional.
There's the former president's son, Don Jr., talking about the economy is pretty much where we left off in terms of manufacturing.
He also said that his friends he hangs out with are struggling, and I think his definition of struggling is very different from the struggle of many of the American people right now. I would argue that Donald Trump Jr. likely doesn't know the price of gas or the cost of a gallon of milk, while many of the American people right now are trying to figure out how to make ends meet and retain all their money. So we have to first understand the difference in struggle. But yeah, we do need more jobs here. But here's the key when we talk about any jobs that are here, who has access to the jobs, what are the wages of those jobs, what are the benefits of those jobs, what industries are these jobs in, and geographically, where are they? Because if all these jobs are coming in and they're only in one sector of the United States, let's say the Northeast sector, then what about people in the South? What about people in the West? Who has access to the C-suite jobs? When we talk about jobs, we have to talk about every single layer of what access to those jobs look like, and not just them being here domestically.
And speaking of jobs, Amber, another major issue tonight was illegal immigration or immigration policy. Who do you think won that part of the debate? You had, Tim Walz saying that Kamala had prosecuted transnational gangs as the Attorney General in California. You also had Vance talking about the opioid epidemic, how it's personally affected him, and basically a reflection of Kamala's policies with Joe Biden over the past 4 years. Who do you think won that portion of the debate?
I thought Vance absolutely routed Tim Walz on that question for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, that comment about Kamala Harris prosecuting transnational gangs when she was Attorney General has been the campaign's canned line for the past 3 months as she has tried to run away from the fact that she was in charge of addressing quote-unquote root causes of the migration crisis in the Northern Triangle countries and did not preside over a decrease in immigration from those countries, and certainly not immigration as a whole. And Tim Walz was visibly shocked by the idea that a migrant crisis could possibly drive up the cost of housing. That's a basic supply and demand issue. And if I may go back for a second on the trust the experts question, because with due respect to my panelists, I'm not sure anyone got that quite right. That message right now is not what the American people want to hear from Tim Walz, because trust in American institutions is at an all-time low in this country, and for very good reason. He was attacking J.D. Vance for suggesting that our national security people, our economic experts have gotten things wrong, but they have. These are the people who told us that Trump colluded with Russia in 2016 and launched a multi-million-dollar investigation against him because of it. These are the people who told us that children needed to be masked and out of schools during the pandemic. These are the people who told us that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely the product of Russian disinformation. The American people don't trust the experts, and they want to know that their leaders are going to have due skepticism when they are hearing this bipartisan consensus from both the bureaucratic state as well as the members of Congress. This is why Trump was so popular in 2016, because he was running against a lot of the old platitudes from both Republicans and Democrats that frankly have not served the interests of the American people.
Dante, I know you're pro-business. You've talked you've praised former President Trump's economic policies before. When it comes to, trust the experts versus what Trump did, bucking the system. Where do you see that fitting in?
There has to be a fine line, but let me just go back to Don Jr. We just saw him. I just want to remind everybody that Vance was his guy. There were some other potential picks for vice president, and the word is from communications that Donald Trump Jr. was really, really advocating for Vance. So the final question, and then the microphone went out, or I think the camera push was, a reporter said, "You look proud," and I'm sure he was, because I do think Vance held his own tonight, and it's good when you fight for somebody and they actually come through for you. So I just wanted to acknowledge that moment and what we were seeing on camera there. But I do think that it's important to question the system at all times. You want to question it, but you also want to let the American people know that our system really does work, and that you can't just throw it all away or ignore it. You can't do things like be a former president and then anytime anything happens that's not in your favor, say, "Oh, the justice system is working against me. Don't trust the justice system." Because now, how does everybody in that system look at it the same way? You can't do that. So I think there's a fine line that has to be crossed. You don't have to just go with status quo all the time, right? A lot of things change, and they should. You should be trying to kick down the door and make things better, but you have to respect and acknowledge what's there in existence and what's been working generally, even though you may question things about it specifically.
And there's a difference in questioning an expert when it comes to something tangible, questioning whether this table will fall, questioning whether the cameras will work, and also questioning whether a decision that an expert makes will affect the livelihood of millions of Americans. And so when Amber mentioned mask mandates, the reality is that is a decision that affected millions of Americans after tons and tons of loss. That's something where we have to decide who's the expert when it comes to how things will affect the greater man or woman, the greater person, versus a particular entity. And that's really, really important to distinguish.
I want to zoom in on one of the topics that came up, which was deportations, expanding on the issue of, or the topic of illegal immigration. Now, the question was, would you separate families who are in the country from their children? Neither answered that, but they, took different stances. Walz went after former President Trump, saying that he did not deliver in 4 years, and he's now dehumanizing people, or these newcomers, as the Democratic Party is calling them lately. J.D. Vance, meanwhile, is saying, talking about family separation is already happening. He was noting that, there's 320,000 children that the DHS has effectively lost. And actually, let's hear from both candidates talking about that, and then we'll dive into our responses.
Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan,
As you ask about family separation, right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border.
Gerard, when it comes to this topic, how do you see both parties handling it when it comes to, say, national security concerns about the fentanyl coming across, or the people on the terror watch list who are coming into the country, the ones from, say, Iran or even China who are coming in, but then also when it comes to, say, the humanizing part, or dehumanizing, if you will, where do you see this going?
I think the Republican Party has been very good at identifying the issue, making this publicly the problem that it is. The Democratic Party has not been so good at admitting that this is a problem, choosing instead to see this war as something that could be fixed by incremental steps, not something that needs a radical rethink. I don't think either party has been very good at addressing it, because we still have this crisis. And I think that it is true that Donald Trump did not build the wall. He built only a small portion of it. We still have unresolved issues with immigration status. We still don't know how to deal with the immigrants who are here. And instead we're prevaricating on whether we need additional laws or to enforce existing laws. So I think neither party has it perfectly right. And I think that this is one of those instances where we do need bipartisan leadership, where we need to listen to people who actually both have guidance from expert, but also have the heart to understand that you can't tear apart families. It's just not something that you do. I do think that there is a point to be said that it's easy to dehumanize people, to consider them as a problem and not as people who are also undergoing a problem. And that is something that I think we all need to be mindful of and do better at.
And Dante, what would you like to see from both camps?
Some middle ground. The border's a problem. We have to control the flow. We just can't take so many people coming in such a quick time because it's overflowing cities. It's too much, and you have to limit it. But at the same time, most of the people have the same backstory that you look at all the immigrants that's come over to the United States from its inception, a chance for a better life. We can't preach that and tout that and then become fearmongers and call everybody criminals and rapists and murderers when they try to become a part of what we're saying is so great, right? We have to have an openness, but at the same time, we do have to control the flow. So I would like to see some middle ground. If you're on the Republican side, you can't scare people into thinking that everybody that comes across the border is bad. If you're on the Democratic side, you can't act like it doesn't exist. You have to acknowledge it. So we just have to have that middle ground.
Amber, Senator Vance also brought up the fact that hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors have crossed the border and sort of equated that to his possible, or former President Trump's possible policy on deporting folks and separating families. Do you think that there is a similar equation there? What do you make of his response?
Well, I do think he should have answered the question more specifically on whether or not they will deport individuals who have a family member who is a U.S. citizen, particularly if you have a parent who is an illegal immigrant and then they have a child in the U.S. And certainly some people take advantage of that to avoid deportation. So that's a difficult policy question that they're going to have to answer that they haven't. That being said, Tim Walz also didn't have an answer for that 320,000 number of migrant children who have been trafficked through the United States and have been lost by the Department of Homeland Security. And when he brings up this so-called bipartisan border bill that has made its way into the Senate conversation, what he doesn't mention is that that bill does not count unaccompanied minors towards the number of individuals who would meet that cap for shutting down the border. So he's setting himself up, if he supports that bill, for a similar unaccompanied minor crisis as one that President Barack Obama saw in 2014, where you had people sending minors across the border because they knew that they weren't going to be subject to the same penalties that other illegal border crossers would have.
Theron, I want to get your thoughts. The Republican argument on the border crisis, part of it is that it boils down to messaging. And so I guess the idea is that, if you don't say that the border's open and you start to say that people will be deported, it will stop that and curb these unaccompanied minors. So is there some type of moral justification for former President Trump's policy there?
Oh, I think what Dante said earlier was right. It's, people on the Republican side is just scare tactics galore. It's, all this crime and all these job things that are being taken away. It's all because of the border being open, and that's not realistic, nor is it true. But Democrats aren't exactly combating that with better messaging. And so, yes, it does depend on that. But also, former President Donald Trump has been in office. I want to be very clear about that. Donald Trump has been president before for a full 4 years. Kamala Harris has been vice president for almost that time. She has not had the final say in any decision-making process, with the exception of being a tie-breaking vote. So when we talk about how far these immigration policies have gone, how much does former President Donald Trump have left? How much has he left open? What did he not get accomplished? And I think that's the elephant in the room that's not being discussed. Is here are the things he said he would do that did not get accomplished. Here are the things he's gonna, seek to finish, and where he made missteps for him to not accomplish the things that he said he was gonna do regarding immigration. If we're gonna continue to ping Vice President Harris, you gotta ping former President Donald Trump for the same things that were incomplete.
A very important discussion, and right now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go to NTD's Iris Tao, who's at a Wisconsin GOP watch party. Iris, how are people there reacting to the debate?
Good evening to you. So just now there were dozens of people in this bar near Milwaukee, about 20 minutes away from where former President Trump was speaking just earlier today to voters and reporters. And right here, the people watching this debate, they are attending this watch party as a GOP watch party attendees. So they are in the Republican camp. And most of them told us that they do think Vance's performance tonight was excellent, how he crushed it, and how they think the body language also showed that Vance was dominating. I mean, while the Trump campaign also has just released a statement praising J.D. Vance's performance, saying how it shows why Trump chose him as his running mate. The Trump campaign said, quote, Vance unequivocally won tonight's debate in dominating fashion. It was the best debate performance from any vice presidential candidate in history. Went on to praise Vance's performance when it comes to specifically the border, economy, and foreign policy discussions. Meanwhile, as a contrast, the VP Harris's campaign also released a statement just now saying that tonight Governor Walz showed exactly why Vice President Harris picked him. He is a leader who cares about the issues that matter most to the American people, adding that on every single issue, the economy, healthcare, foreign policy, reproductive freedom, gun violence, Governor Walz won. So on pretty much the same issues, both campaigns are insisting that their candidates were on the leading side. Meanwhile, here's a clip of a little roundtable discussion we did with the GOP voters here who just watched the debate here at this watch party about what they think about tonight's debate. Watch.
Vance was right on the money when he talks about it all started 4 years ago and all the stuff that she says now. Where has it been for the last 4 years?
What surprised me is how unprepared Tim Walz came across to me. He knew these questions were to come his way. He looked absolutely, almost, his face looked like he was afraid and scared when he answered some of the questions, and how well J.D. Vance came across in terms of how knowledgeable he was of the situation and how much depth he had over the issues that we face and what we need to do to go forward.
He overpowered Walz completely. He knew what he was saying. He was sure of himself, and he believes it. And he's empathetic. He's a real person.
And the Harris campaign also just sent out an email highlighting what they call, quote, a damning non-answer from J.D. Vance on Trump's election loss in January 6. We know that was a big focus, especially toward the end of the debate. Meanwhile, Trump on Truth Social was complaining about the moderator's question on that, saying how it was a biased question and that the moderator made a statement instead of asking a question. Trump, during the debate, has been doing a live, what he called play-by-play on Truth Social, and praising J.D. Vance, saying how he crushed Tim Walz with facts and that JD was steady and strong. But also Trump was demanding an apology from the network CBS for previously saying that the laptop from Hunter Biden was fake. And that's what he insisted tonight as well during the remarks here in Milwaukee when he was talking to us reporters in the meeting room. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thank you for that.
And let's now take a deeper dive into the issue of tariffs. Joining us now is economist and China economic analyst Antonio Graceffo, who's also the author of Beyond the Belt and Road. Antonio, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Antonio, first off, specifically with regard to the debate in tariffs and China policy, were you satisfied with either of the candidates' stances tonight?
Well, I think it's good that they want to move forward with tariffs. Tariffs are a significant component to our national security. We need to protect our supply chains from China. I think we're all in agreement on that. I think, though, that the Republicans tend to have a stronger stance against China, which I think is more than warranted at this point. We've had a slow decoupling, a slow de-risking from China, but I think that we need to step that up and quickly cut China out of our supply chains.
And with regard to tariffs, it looks like both candidates will use them, but their approaches may differ. Former President Trump proposing a 10% tariff on all imports, 60% on Chinese imports. Vice President Harris hasn't given specifics yet about what she'll do, but has shown an aversion to Trump's blanket tariff proposal. We're currently dealing with lingering inflation and now a port strike expected to further increase the cost of imports. How might that 10% blanket tariff impact Americans short and long term?
Well, tariffs will always make the products more expensive. That is the purpose of the tariff. But the idea is then it gives American producers an opportunity to make that product because it raises the price of the import. In the case of the 60% tariff on China, we would hope that a 60% increase in the price of a Chinese product will prevent people from buying it altogether. And at the same time, a tariff is a tax. It goes to the government. This money that goes to the U.S. government so that they don't have to raise income taxes, for example. Whereas if we just import from China, well, that money goes to the CCP. If we put a tariff, that money goes to the U.S. government. So Trump is spot on with the 60%. I mean, we could do 100%, whatever number it takes to stop people from buying Chinese products and then to encourage the development of manufacturing and producing domestic products.
Will the tariff actually also help with the supply chain that we could be seeing right now, which ultimately turns into a national security issue?
Yeah, well, think about this. If you're producing domestically, you're going to have a lot less issues with ports. You know, so anything that comes up with shipping across the oceans, problems at the ports, that's all going to be eliminated if we're manufacturing domestically and then we're shipping by truck around the country. So that's going to help a great deal with supply chains. The big issue is the national security issue is that if we go to war with China, which is the most likely war, well, I say that as perhaps a war with Iran is looming, but with China being the overarching threat to the U.S., if we go to war with them, they're not going to sell us products anymore. And if we're dependent on them, we will then have shortages. So we absolutely need to build these things in the United States. And the best way to wean companies off of Chinese imports is to raise these tariffs. At the same time, the tariffs will encourage our allies, Europe, our Southeast Asian allies across the world, to then build factories in the United States rather than exporting them from abroad. And this, of course, creates jobs. It brings more revenue to the United States.
To your point, when you think about, the term proxy war, China sort of fits into that exact definition. The way they use proxies around the world, you factor in Taiwan, their support for, all different adversaries across the globe. While the U.S. has largely embraced tariffs against China, the CCP is shifting its trade to other countries like Mexico and India. They're also aiming to become a more influential world power based on socialist, anti-democratic values, which runs contrary to, obviously, American values. The CCP wants to achieve this in part through trade in different projects like infrastructure. So besides tariffs, what can the next administration do to encourage trade among like-minded nations and reduce reliance on investments in China?
Yeah, well, we definitely need to continue with our coalition building, encouraging the G7, encouraging the EU to support us in the trade war against China. I really believe that one of the strengths of Trump was that he sort of held it over the heads of the Europeans, saying, look, we've been paying for your defense since World War II. If we total that up, that's billions and billions of dollars we've spent to defend you. It is now time for you to step up and defend us or to help us in the war against China. It makes no sense that the U.S. is battling China economically. Meanwhile, the EU may continue to trade with China normally. So we absolutely need to build these coalitions. We need to convince our allies to do the same. And I like the Trump idea of sort of billing people for things. We're going to bill Europe for their defense. We're going to bill Mexico for the money it costs for the illegal immigrants and the narco trafficking and so forth. And just sort of say to them, look, we are absorbing a lot of costs on your behalf. You now need to support us in these other endeavors.
Antonio Graceffo, really appreciate perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And bringing it back to our panel there, a little discussion there, Gerard, on tariffs on China. Do you see this as a net positive, or are there some potential risks to the U.S. economy because of them?
There are potential risks, especially in the short term, when we do have price volatility, when we do have inflation still a factor, when we do have an economy that's not fully recovered and questionable if it's going into a recession. But the flip side of tariffs is what you do with those tariffs, whether you're just using it to butt this government income or you're serving some other purpose. For example, if you want to bring back manufacturing, you have to create conditions so that to happen. That's beyond making it more expensive to buy goods from China. You have to eliminate a lot of the restrictive laws and regulations that currently exist that have priced out American manufacturers. So if you're using the source of funds from tariffs to do that, to rebuild American manufacturing, great. But if all you're doing is you're using it as a buttress to force a country essentially to shift where it's buying goods from, that itself is not enough.
And Dante, with regard to climate change and the climate agenda, both candidates gave their takes on what needs to change in U.S. energy policy, with Vance leaning into bringing back American manufacturing, Waltz touching on jobs a bit. Let's play a soundbite from earlier.
We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country.
And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production.
Dante, a passionate discussion there.
I think it's absolutely right. All of this is connected. And you, Steve, just even talked about if we manufactured more here, we wouldn't, maybe this, the strike at the ports wouldn't be so impactful because we have everything in-house, which we don't right now. But all of this stuff is connected, and we do, as Jared said, it has to be a plan. You're not just outpricing people from bringing it in, but you have to help develop it here. That comes with tax breaks on manufacturers and different companies. It comes with allowing people, loosening the restrictions so they can build factories and certain things in different areas. You want to open all of that up. Governor Walz is right that we are now producing more oil than we ever have. We're producing oil so we can try to be energy independent. I think that's going to be key. And if we are manufacturing here, we can control how those manufacturing plants work. And if they are producing, coal or whatever they're producing, we can control that because everything will be in-house. So I think having control of our manufacturing is key that will address a lot of these issues. And that's what we need to focus on for our economy.
I think part of the concern that certain people in probably more urban communities experience, though, is yes, it sounds good to bring those things here, but where are those plants located? What communities are those plants located in? Who benefits from those? Who loses out? Even in Tennessee, where I'm from, a very, very probably the richest person in the world, arguably right now, has built a data plant there, and it is hurting our infrastructure. It is hurting our local economy. It's hurting the neighborhoods. And so it sounds good, but we have to be strategic about where those plants are placed so that it doesn't hurt particular neighborhoods more so than others.
But if you could point to Detroit, Philadelphia, Cleveland, all of those places, Pittsburgh, where they had manufacturing plants, whether it was steel that they were producing at a shipyard in Philadelphia, now that's gone and you don't have those jobs available where you can move up in those positions and have a career there. So I do think that there's benefit to having those plants in large cities because that stimulates the growth and the economy for that area and gives everybody a place to work where they can move up and get better.
Benefit, yes, but I think the health impact is sometimes the negative, and that's the part that's not really factored in when people consider the bottom line.
Amber, I want to get your take on this.
Well, I think Vance made a good point about being careful about where we get these green energy technologies and inputs from, right? Because a lot of it does come from China. I mean, when we look at electric vehicles, the raw earth minerals that go into the chargers, for example, that market is completely strangled by China because they have control of the cobalt mines in Africa. So when you're in a Paris Climate Accord agreement, for example, with countries who say that they're signing on to reduce carbon emissions, but aren't actually doing it in a real way and aren't actually abiding by those agreements, then you're in a worthless treaty with those other countries. And we've seen the results of just blindly throwing money at a clean energy investment as opposed to letting the market do a better job of dictating where the American people are at on this issue, when we have an administration that has spent billions of dollars on building electric vehicle chargers, and the grand result is 7 electric vehicle chargers. So clearly the answer here is not passing a billion or trillion dollar infrastructure bill that is actually a climate change bill, as Joe Biden has recently admitted to, without taking stock of what impact that is going to have on the economy and whether or not the individuals who are being displaced from the natural energy, coal, gas economy are actually going to be able to transfer into those positions seamlessly.
Amber, there's also the issue of, maybe clean energy, but the way that those solar panels, and J.D. Vance sort of alluded to it, isn't necessarily the cleanest. I believe it was at one point, maybe still now, 90% of solar panels made in China, many of which in the Xinjiang region where there's a declared genocide.
Exactly. And not to mention the fact that when you compare the environmental output of some of these products, the manufacturing of them often negates a lot of the benefit that you might have once they're actually put into place. Electric vehicles, again, is a perfect example where you see that the inputs required to make the chargers and build the cars often negate the impact on the reducing of carbon emissions once the vehicle's already made. So these are significant problems that we really haven't addressed in America. We just think that because it has the word green next to it, that it's better. And there's also been a lot of studies about the fact that there are frankly vast regions in the United States where solar panels or wind energy are not feasible for powering that entire region, and certainly not in a cost-effective and reliable way that low-income and working-class communities rely on in order to power their homes.
And Gerard, when it comes to, say, energy independence, we've often heard that, energy security is national security. Right now, with what we saw with Hurricane Helene and the destruction there, we are hearing, people on the ground saying what helped them was their gas-powered cars, their gas-powered energy and all of that. When it comes to the talk about climate or these green energies, and if, they're dirty because they're coming from China, and China's the world's biggest polluter, when you combine all the industrialized countries together, China does a lot more pollution there. That doesn't seem to often come into the discussion when we talk about cleaning up the air. When it comes to what we saw with Hurricane Helene, do you think that will change the discussion of these renewable and unreliable, if you will, energy sources?
I think this discussion has been changing for years now, and we're just starting to catch up to it. The reality is, as we were discussing this now, I couldn't help but think exactly of the people in Hurricane Helene. Where are they charging their Teslas? Where are they powering their battery backups? They're not, because we still need non-renewable resources. We need to go into energy independence for a reason, because we can't just rely on solar, we can't just rely on battery, we can't just rely on something that we label as clean, which is more of a political expediency than anything else. Look, we shoot ourselves in the foot. We are shutting down manufacturing and transitioning to something that does not help us from a national security perspective, while allowing other countries like China to consistently cheat on international agreements and benefit their own economies at our expense. How is that helping the environment? How is that helping anyone? All we're doing is setting a set of rules that we're playing by, no one else is, and we're getting hurt in the process.
But we can't also say that, for example, we can't say nobody, it's not possible for everybody to have an electric car, right? We just don't have the grid to support it. That doesn't mean that we should not be building grids. There has to be a beginning to this kind of renewal of where we see our energy coming from and what we can do with it. And to your point, what you were just saying, yes, we're bringing a lot of those things in, even solar panels and things from China. If we manufacture those here, we can oversee the emissions and make sure that they are being manufactured in a way that they're not canceling out the impact that they have on the energy and the air pollutants. So I think there's a way that we can introduce this into our society. It's happening. Just different forms of energy are happening. We can't rely on the old school. We can't ignore that either. We got to drill. We got to frack. We have to do all of that.
You sound like former President Trump.
But we have to incorporate this. We have to incorporate these new forms of energy and build our network so we're not left behind when everybody else moves on.
And if I may jump in really quickly on Hurricane Helene, there was a young woman who shared this story about how she would not be able to feed her family right now if she didn't have a gas stove. And there are EPA officials right now who are floating the idea of trying to restrict gas stoves. This has already been advanced in New York. This is not some imaginary policy that the right created. This is something that has been pushed by some Democrats, we are seeing the potential consequences of that when people do rely on that energy during a natural disaster.
A very topical discussion, but we do have to go now to NTD's Kevin Hogan. Now, Kevin, what is the reaction from the Democratic Watch Party where you are in Pennsylvania?
Yes, Tiff, I'm out here in Newtown, Pennsylvania, and democracy is on full display. These Harris-Walz supporters coming out to learn more about these candidates' positions, very enthusiastic about the vice presidential debate that we saw tonight. We'll touch on that in a minute. But the Harris-Walz campaign has responded after the debate, saying that Governor Walz has shown himself to be a straight talker, concerned with the issues that matter most to the American public, saying that he has the upper hand in areas like the economy, foreign policy, abortion, health care, keeping gun violence under control, and saying that he would be a very good governing partner for Kamala Harris should she win re-election. And I spoke to some of these voters, and they were very impressed with the amount of civility that they saw on that debate stage tonight. And they're glad that issues like childcare were brought up, but they wanted to see those drilled down a little bit more. Here's what they told me.
I was happy to see a high level of civility. I miss that from prior years. I think we've gotten more and more contentious, and that we hope that people choose sides and want to fight battles as opposed to choosing sides and wanting to work together to resolve problems. And while they touched for a moment on the impact of early childhood education and childcare, I don't think they put enough time to that. Families are struggling with how to afford programs for their children, how to afford childcare for their children. And when people are paying as much for childcare as they are for their mortgages, for their rent, they have to make decisions that are hard and not always in the best interest of their children. And no parent wants to do that.
And these voters said that Governor Walz has shown himself to be a good negotiator, someone who's able to find common ground, thus the way that things get done in this country. And back to the Harris-Walz campaign, they said that the American public deserves to see Vice President Harris and former President Trump on the debate stage one more time, giving Trump a little bit of pressure to accept another debate. Back to you, Tiff.
All right, Kevin, out there in Pennsylvania for us. Thank you for that. And let's bring it back in studio here. We have our guests, of course, Dante Mills, Amber Duke, Theron Bond, and Gerard Felitti. Now, we heard from the candidates earlier about various topics when it comes to affordability, whether that's housing, health care, abortion, all of these different topics. When it comes to these topics, given that the economy is top of mind for so many issues, first off, Dante, how do you think the candidates did? And then we'll get into some sound.
I think they did well. They went into a lot more detail than I even expected, and more detail than we heard at the presidential debate about things like childcare, which is very, very important to a large voter bloc. Young moms and fathers and families. So they touched on issues that I don't think people expected to hear, and they were able to learn a lot about. It shows that those issues are important to them, and you hope that means that they're going to focus on making those things more affordable day to day.
I want to zoom in on one topic that did come up in tonight's debate. That, of course, was the topic of abortion. It's been a very fiery topic, if you will, controversial, depending on how you look at it. And, when it comes to the candidates and how they plan to manage it, here's their differing responses.
We've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. Do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience.
We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
All right, Amber, how did you view their responses and how it will play into how voters will vote?
Well, clearly J.D. Vance is trying to humanize the issue there. He's playing into the fact that Trump has been more moderate on this issue in terms of personally supporting a 15-week ban, but saying that he would veto any federal legislation that came across his desk, and saying explicitly that I understand that a lot of voters don't trust us when we say that, and I want to rebuild trust with them. And then you heard Tim Walz talking about freedom and whether women should have the right to choose, similar to like they had under Roe v. Wade. The Harris campaign has said that she would sign a bill that would codify Roe v. Wade as federal law. So those are the two differing positions. I was sort of confused on Tim Walz's insistence that the Minnesota law does not allow abortions at any point during a pregnancy. I went and checked the bill during the debate, and it does, so I'm not sure where the confusion is on that.
Just to clear that up, what that bill says is the doctor is not required to save the child's life. And it puts it in the hands of the doctor. If the doctor in that decision decides that the baby can be saved or there's something that should happen, he can. It doesn't restrict him at all. There's no restriction. It just doesn't place a requirement there.
What I'm saying is there's also no restriction on trimesters, right? Which is what J.D. Vance was arguing. And then on the question of the born alive survivors question, which is a separate one, there have been 8 babies in Minnesota that have died because the doctors refused to provide life-saving care. So I think that is a legitimate question for J.D. Vance to raise, particularly as Democrats, including Kamala Harris, have refused to vote for the Abortion Survivors Act, which would require doctors to provide that care. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's the doctor's choice. Now, that's not an important question for us to raise because we're not doctors. We don't know if that child, the conditions of that survival, what that would be. So I think it's the doctors who decide that in the room, not J.D. Vance, not Donald Trump, not Tim Walz, not Kamala Harris, the doctors.
Well, here's the thing. Late-term abortion doesn't exist. It's called a DNC.
Well, it does exist.
It doesn't exist, and it happens when
There's 3% of abortions.
It's called a DNC, and it's when a woman has a miscarriage. You know how I know? Because my mother had one. I'm a rainbow baby. My mother had 2 miscarriages, one before me and one when I was 19 years old. That's how I factually know. As a woman who cannot bear children for a number of reasons due to reproductive issues, reproductive issues are not just about abortion, and late-term abortion is not a thing. A DNC, depending on who you're talking to, can be classified as that, but it is literally for the removal of what is happening inside the woman's body that can then become toxic to her system. That is factually true. You can Google it. You can fact check it till the cows come home. That's true. Late-term abortion does not exist. It's DNC, and it's for a life-saving procedure for a woman who has a miscarriage who does not have everything released.
If I may respond, there are late-term abortions in the United States. Approximately 3% of abortions are late-term, and they're not dilation and curtilages, which is what you're talking about. That is a medical procedure that removes fetal tissue from a fetus that has already passed away. It's not classified as an abortion medically. And Tim Walz lied on that stage when he said that woman in Texas almost bled out because she was not able to get a DNC. That is false. There's an explicit exception written into the Texas law for miscarriage care. You can read it.
My mother was a Texas resident, so I'm very clear on what Texas law is, especially if you are carrying a child and you're in a marriage. And so there is no thing as a late-term abortion.
There is an exception in the Texas law for miscarriage care and DNCs. It's explicitly written in there. There's not
that's
a single...
what it is. That's not late-term abortion.
Yeah, they're two separate things. They both exist.
Late-term, who's had a late-term abortion?
Guttmacher Institute, which provided statistics for Planned Parenthood for decades, says that 3% of abortion.
Somebody who's had a late-term abortion.
3%.
Show me that. It's nowhere.
Okay, great segue because we are going to NTD Verified with Dave Martin, putting some of the biggest statements of tonight under a microscope. Dave, what are we looking at tonight?
Thank you, Tiff. Now, as we finish discussing the debate, let's take a quick look at a couple of back and forth points mentioned, see if we can verify them or not, starting with what J.D. Vance said about Donald Trump working in a bipartisan way to fix Obamacare. Now, here's what Vance said. Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. He's talking about Obamacare here. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. Now, here's what we found. This is a Donald Trump executive order. It's dated January 20, 2017. It is the policy of my administration to seek the prompt repeal of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, that is Obamacare. All right, so let's go to a little bit more salty one here. This is Tim Walz, J.D. Vance here, a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care. Now, Walz said that's not true. Now, what we found in 2023, Minnesota updated its abortion law. Now, prior to this update, born alive as a result of an abortion, all reasonable measures shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. Now, after the 2023 law that Walz signed, it no longer even said abortion. It says an infant who is born alive, all reasonable measures shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel to care for the infant who is born alive. So the previous language specifically required the doctor to try and save the life of an infant that survived an abortion. The new law that Walz signed does no longer specifically require to do that. So that's what we found on these two issues here. Anyway, back to you guys.
NTD's Dave Martin, thank you so much for that update. And that does conclude our special coverage of the first and final vice presidential debate. A big thank you to our panel, political strategist and attorney Dante Mills, Washington editor for The Spectator Amber Duke, Democratic strategist Theron Bond, and attorney and political strategist Gerard Filitti. Thank you all so much for joining us.
And we also want to thank everyone at home for being with us tonight.
I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier. And from all of us here at NTD, have a good night. And remember, stay informed and always seek the truth.
A performance that truly matters. For each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. See it at least once in your lifetime. Shen Yun. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.